I think overall we're guided by perhaps four kind of key areas in terms of how we approach teaching and learning about the Holocaust, which we've termed authentic encounters with this past. And what we mean by authentic, these four different areas. One would be the importance of young people generating their own questions, feeling free to inquire into this history for themselves. One of the ways that we do that is to provide some stimulus material, which might be a small shoe, for example, a child's shoe, which young people are facilitated in exploring the meaning of that shoe, so a shoe found at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and through careful questioning and support, the students themselves reveal the history of the object and the narrative of the owner, and are left with a dissonant space, a difficult cognitive space, and an effective emotional space, where they are provoked into asking really quite difficult and profound questions. But those questions are generated from the students, the individuals, and the group itself, rather than being prepackaged by the teacher, in the sense that the students arrive at these questions, and those questions then govern the scheme of work. We consider this to be an authentic encounter because the students themselves are following their own line of questioning. These are not borrowed meanings or packaged meanings set in advance by the teacher, but are freely arrived at by the students through their encounter with this history. So the student-led inquiry questions is one key component. How they then explore those questions is another element to authentic learning, or finding authentic meanings in this past. Because one of the guiding principles we suggest to teachers is not to just answer the students' questions. One of the reasons why young people and adults ask questions of this period is because they don't really want to think about it anymore. It's a very difficult, traumatic, upsetting and dissonant space to be when you're exploring mass atrocity. So simple answers are very well and quickly received. It allows us to stop thinking and to move on and to do other things. We want young people, though, to stay in this space, wrestling with those difficult problems and trying to make meaning for themselves. So one aspect is not to give the answers to the students, but rather to allow them an encounter with original evidence from the past, sources from the past, which might be photographs or film or artifacts or case studies or documents. Could be visiting sites of the Holocaust, or study visits abroad. In each of these cases, we open up possibilities for them to explore further the answers to the questions that they themselves had, and to develop along that journey some of the critical thinking skills that are needed to interpret this past. That's a third element, the idea of independent thinking, that young people are free to come to their own conclusions, to make their own meanings. Again, not borrowed meanings from the students, from the teachers, but their own meanings that are arrived at from a deep inquiry into this history. Those answers that they come up with, those meanings that they come up with, may differ one to another in the same student group, and they may of course differ from the teacher's own thinking on this subject. But that freedom to explore is one of the things which is particularly powerful about a classroom situation, I think, if a teacher is able to generate that kind of a space. It's important, though, to realise that what we don't mean by independent thinking is that all opinions are equally valid, all interpretations are equally valid, any opinion goes. The final dimension of this pedagogical approach is an understanding of the importance of evidence in coming to our conclusions, and a disciplinary critical mindset. So the opinions and the ideas and the interpretations that students produce are only valid if they are supported by the evidence itself, and if the evidence will bear that kind of conclusion. So we can disagree on all sorts of issues, whether that's why and how the Holocaust happened, or the responses of the victims, or why didn't bystanders do more to help and to rescue and to save their neighbours. These are all matters for reasonable debates, and we can come to very different kinds of conclusions and interpretations and different meanings out of this, different meanings for our own lives also. But what the evidence won't bear is the distortions of the deniers and the so-called revisionists, for example. And one of the key things we're trying to cultivate in our students is a respect for a desire for truth and a respect for evidence and an understanding of criticality and how evidence can be used fairly, not to omit the things that don't agree with our own particular view, not to willfully leave out certain things that don't say what we want them to say, but rather to struggle with the dissonance again that we find when our own ideas are confronted by the historical reality. And rather than trying to change the historical reality, sometimes we actually have to change our own worldview and our own way of thinking about human behaviour and how and why this was possible.